We are really glad if you join our team. What we are talking about today, it's basically not really a Next.js session, because I assume you all have some experience at least with at least React. So what I'm going to cover is why testing matters in such applications, what kind of tests we have, how we would test Next.js applications in specific, which then covers unit testing, where I want to show Jest and React testing library, and also cover some Playwright tests for integration and end-to-end. First of all, you may ask yourself, because sometimes you work for a startup and they don't really have tests, why it matters. It's because you don't really want to ship something to production and it causes a lot of bugs, because that does not make your customers happy. That does not make developers happy. So it ensures that your application is stable, over time, because you add more features, you enhance the product, and so on. You can catch bugs early with different kinds of tests, and you can improve the code quality, which also makes it easier and maintainable and easier for developers. And it's just really a good practice to add tests, and even think about tests before you actually start coding. In theory, how can I actually break what I write? In frontend, there is a bigger pyramid. You can probably find a lot of those types online, but in theory, there is a testing pyramid, which basically means the more time and effort you need to spend, the higher up it's on the pyramid. But it's also that the execution time. So for example, unit tests are covering, in a Next.js or in a front-end application, basically each single function isolated. So it's pretty fast, and it's easy to add, and it's really easy to write for developers. The next step would be then integration tests, which is basically it. If you think about a React application, you think about the whole page itself, which contains of a lot of components. They might all have different functionalities, and then you just test how everything works together. End-to-end tests are pretty much more complex, and they take a while, and they are most common in the CI/CD run. So for example, if you have a testing environment like staging or UAT in some companies, then you just run your end-to-end tests and you mimic how a user would interact with your website. So there's nothing mock, there's everything as you would use your website or the product itself. The first stage, when we code, and you probably have thought about that a lot, is unit tests, which basically in a Next.js or React application, it involves also testing individual components in an isolated way. What does that mean? That if you have a function which, I don't know, takes two texts as an input and just console log something, or print it on the screen, basically, then you would just test this function. But you can't really make sure that this function inside that component and the other component, that's not part of the unit tests. So it just makes sure that this isolated, small, little, tiny unit works as expected. There are a few benefits on it. It's fast, so you have immediate feedback. It just runs, and then you see fail or pass. It runs isolated, so each unit test should function independently. It doesn't matter if another one is breaking or anything. It should just run by itself. It can be repeatable, so the same results every time they run, which means whenever you run it with a given input, you always expect a given output, or you expect a certain output. It is self-verifying. You don't have to interact with it. So it basically runs even without you doing anything. Sometimes if you think about when you code and you just commit something, and then it immediately just runs all unit tests just to make sure you didn't break anything. It's timely, ideally before you write the code. So you all heard about the methodology about like you test basically before you actually write code, because you just know, okay, hey, if I have a function which sums up two numbers and I just give it like a string and a number, it should fail. So you basically already think about that, but in an ideal world, you should write the unit tests before or immediately after you write code. There's also a lot of coverage. So inside every application, you have certain coverage, like 90% of functions, 90% of lines. Unit testing, in particular in Next.js application, can be used to test individual components. What does it mean? Imagine you have a button component, and that button component takes a method and a text, which is basically the button text. And then you can test it. Next.js can, in combination with React testing library, just simulate user interactions and simulate the user interface. So it basically renders your button component and then just tests everything. If you pass, hi, I'm a button text, the button text should be that. It can quickly catch issues on that component or function level before they propagate to a higher level. Because imagine you just add something and you didn't really check for like any failure or like any, if we talk about the function called sum and you pass it a string and a number and you didn't really test it. So that might completely break your application. Tools for that, which I will be showing, it's not a definite answer. Like there are a lot of tools out everywhere. It's Jest, which is a JavaScript testing framework, and React testing library. It is to simulate user interactions. It has it fires event, it mocks something, it can click and everything. So you can basically simulate what the user would do with that component. That's all nice, because I can probably talk a lot about code. So you just now need to confirm you see my code.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I can make it a bit bigger. So when it comes to unit tests, it's like, imagine every function you have, it can be since you have like functional programming. So you have like functions you can export and you might reuse it. You might have a format date. I just have like some basic function, which basically should format the date for you. And you can use it on an e-commerce platform. You might use it on various screens. So you can export this function, but then you might not know if everything works fine. So for Jest, it basically, this one...
Steph, could you increase a little bit more the editor?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, if you are leaving the code, no problem. Just later you can.
I can actually also, because I uploaded this, so in case anyone is interested in it.
Okay. Cool.
It should be public. Yeah, I hope it's public. Yeah. So that's the base code. So what I'm doing, you can actually recreate it yourself if you want. Did you say decrease or increase?
Increase. No, but this size now is bigger than the other, so that's good. Okay. It's good, so you can continue. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. No. Okay. So let's imagine we have this format date. What you do with like the format date is, this function takes a string. I'm not spending like the next half an hour explaining unit tests, but that's just like to show you that this is kind of like what you would test. So for the format date function, we always, might not split it because then it's too small. So I might just copy the code that you know what I'm doing here. I hope it's still visible. It's just easier probably to see what we test.
Where we are still seeing your editor.
Yeah,
date function. Okay.
I just copied this here, which is in the other file. because I think if I split screen, it might get too small.
Which other file, sorry?
The format date function.
Okay. Okay, this one we are seeing. Okay.
Okay. So when it comes to Jest, you just mock everything what you would assume your function would do. So let's imagine, what day is it? 23rd, I think. I assume. That's basically what you would give the function, and then what would you expect it to do? In an ideal world, if it's not broken, then we would just say expected output, which basically is...
Steph, we are not seeing what you are typing. I'm sorry.
You're not seeing that?
Oh. No, we are still seeing Jest code, the format date function Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. So let me, because I'm not really sure why this is never really... No, entire screen. Okay, let me try it again. Google doesn't like me. If I type something now, can you see that?
Can you type something or are you typing? We're still seeing, but not the typing. Or please, Nevada, tell me otherwise. Okay, no, she's also not seeing.
What are you seeing? Now you should see yourself.
We are seeing ourselves, yes.
Okay, you can see my code now?
Yes, we can see the code in the editor, yes.
And did I highlight something? You can't see.
No.
I swear. Let me try a different screen.
Sure.
I'm sorry, but that's most of the time like the case.
Yeah, it's normal, don't worry.
So now, let me... Screen 2. Okay, so you should see... I mean, now I can see what you're seeing. So
Yes. We are seeing your tracking. Yes, we just need, if we can increase, then would be perfect.
Okay. Because that's a huge screen, so for me it's even more.
Okay. No, I think that's fine. I think we can read. Thank you.
Okay, so I was explaining this one. So it formats a valid date. I copied this here that you can easily see that. And I just actually want to test if my function is doing what I want it to do. So for that, I would basically, I defined what I give the function, but I also defined like what I actually expect the function to return, which basically will then just you use the function that I should import. Nothing really happens now because Jest is not really testing anything, because Jest can then just check what this result variable holds with what I expected output. So now it does not really September, because I'm not really doing that because it's year, month, day. Okay. To local. Okay. So in that case, you see, like if I put like 2023 here, it's also not working because I did not tell him it's 2023.
Steph?
Yeah.
Sorry, but again, we are not see what you were. Now, yes, this time. Okay. Just keep continue. Okay. I can see now. Yeah.
Okay. So that's like an example of a unit test. I mean, if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see now. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So what actually is here, it's just like I think about what I wrote in my function, and in ideal case, everything works fine. So just can be used to like just test every single thing in your function, or give it like an invalidate. So you can basically, I'm usually not a friend of copying or pasting, but since I have a lot of share issues, apparently, you would do the same thing here. Just checking, right click to change to it. Okay. So we do have an output. So let's just run this. So now you can see it's definitely not what I expect. So it receives an invalidate. It's expected September 23rd, 2024. But that's what you actually expect it not to be, because we just passed it like invalidate. So in theory, if we change this, it would behave the same way as if your function gets data from your API and the data is a string and not a datetime. So that's what you actually try to do, because in that case, you would know, okay, the application should not break. It should maybe display invalidate, or it should display error in receiving the purchase data, or whatever you want to do. So thinking about that for each of your function is like the smaller the better, to be fair. You don't really want to have like a lot of really tiny function if it doesn't make sense. So it depends on your code, what you write, if it makes sense. But if you move it out to like an exported function, then it's way easier to test and just to take care of any misbehavior you might have, or anything you might have forgot to test in your application. Does that make sense? Besides the sharing issues, apparently Google doesn't like me.
All good. Now all good.
Okay, because now I am going to move this here, because now I can see what you're seeing, because now I'm on a different screen. Yeah, okay. So we will do like a bit more unit. I'll just explain the other one and then we dive into the code, because I created like ad hoc, like really tiny, probably not best practice Next.js application where we can just see why and how we would actually use unit tests and integration and end-to-end tests. Integration and end-to-end tests are pretty much, you could say, similar. The only difference is like most of the time for like front end, you can actually mock everything for integration tests. So it does not rely on any API call, for example, because you just want to make sure that the component and every single layer works smoothly together. Compared to end-to-end tests, where you actually just, you need to host it somewhere and you visit that website and you do everything what a user would do, which then would result in any error if there were, for example, any API changes and you might not have updated your application for that. So that would catch that early on, because the way it's written, we will see Playwright. Playwright offers a lot of those things where you can just basically create your page as like a class, an object model, and you can reuse it for integration and end-to-end tests. But integration tests would need you to know what API contract we have. Like you need to have certain knowledge and information about like what is the data you expect. So you would work with mocks. Then you just need to rely on like the backend keep steady, because that would just not fail if the backend changes the property names or whatever. So overall, end-to-end test ensures that the app meets overall system requirements, so it works smoothly with backend and so on, while compared to integration testing, it just verifies the whole app itself. So it does not really depend on anything. Integration tests often verifies how different models of a user interface interact and collaborate, which is meaning like imagine a page. A page has like a container component. The container component has 10 other components and everything needs to work together, which was not covered by a unit test. So that also simulates real user interactions, but you just want to ensure the UI elements and functionality, API calls, data as a mock work well together. But once again, it is the middle step. So end-to-end tests are like way more complex because you would need to like set up everything. And integration tests would just add another layer of like testing above, on top of unit tests. I'm getting confused with two screens. Okay, so I'm going to show you Playwright. I'm not sure like how familiar you are with Playwright, if you've ever heard of it. To be fair, before we actually migrated for our testing suite, we used Cypress. Cypress might be a bit more famous, but Playwright is just it's keeping up with it. So it gets more and more traction because it's way easier to use. You can mimic so many different browsers because you also want to make sure when you do front-end testing, you test on multiple browsers. But not every developer has like, I don't know, a Windows machine and a Mac at home and different screens and everything. So you can't really test it manually, which also takes time, but also like on a mobile phone. So you want to know that it behaves and the layout and everything is displayed correctly as you would expect it. And Playwright offers that out of the box. So you can use different browsers. Playwright uses page object models, which is a really cool name for something which basically is an old-fashioned JavaScript class. So you have your app and you have your page, and every page is defined as a class. When we think about the class in JavaScript, or if you have experience with any other programming language, it's basically you have the constructor, you have some read-only like locators inside that class. It's only accessible in that class. You can extend other classes and so on, but basically your landing page would be landing page. It has a header, paragraph, I don't know, title and a link and so on, which is all based in this page object model. It also has functions you can just use, but it might not make a lot of sense. So, and I will show you that, which might be much better. Now I have too many screens. So I basically built an example application using the link provided. You can find that without tests, or I'm pretty sure I did not upload the tests by accident. It has two different things. It's a calculator and a random code generator. The first one is a calculator. It does not have any API call, and the second one uses a fake API, so utilizing Next.JS's API, where we basically can also test how we do an integration test and mock that call. Because for an integration test, you would need to mock out the page. So an API call would need to have a response, because otherwise you just don't display anything. It also has Jest React testing library, and it already comes with Playwright. So that's not the last slide now. I just double check every 5 minutes if you see what I see.
Yes, we are seeing now editor.
Okay, great. So this app, in theory, I mean, some prerequisites are like for every Next.js application. I'm not going over that now, but that app has, as mentioned, two different pages. One is a calculator page, which basically is like a really dummy thing and can just calculate things. And the other one, okay, everything's working. It's all the time when you show something as an engineer, it's never. So that basically has an API endpoint, an integrated one in a Next.js application, which retrieves the code and then displays the code. And if you can see here, if I reload it, it just says loading until it receives the response.
Would you increase a little bit to stuff so would it be better visible for us?
What should I do?
Could you increase, zoom in? Control plus or Command plus? Yes. Awesome. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, my second screen is huge. That's why sharing is usually not. That's not working. I just want to see how it behaves on that zoom level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you see my code again?
No, we're seeing the calculator now.
Okay. Just give me 1 second.
The code now.
Okay.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Okay, never mind. So this app is a really basic Next.js app. I'm not giving a session on Next.js now because I would be embarrassed if I would. So that's basically a boilerplate Next.js application, which just gives you out of the box the app router, which is introduced with Next.js 13. So it might look a bit different than the Next.js application you are used to. But the way it behaves, it's the same. We have here our fake API, which I basically just gave some random data that I can query the API and then just retrieve one of the responses, the ones you saw there. It has a page and it has a dummy page test. Since we talked about the calculator page, I had to make sure that we have at least one component to test, which basically is, so each of them is a reusable component, as you would also design a Next.js application, because that makes it sure it can be reused and you just don't repeat yourself. The way this calculator button, that single tiny component works, it just, once again, that I would not really do a component for that, but still it fulfills the purpose. So it basically gets the label, a method you can call, a data test study that we can easily access it in any test we want to do, and a class name in case, I guess you can see this, the 0 is much bigger in that case. So doing I might want to just see you. Can you raise hands if you have any experience with React testing library or Jest? I think
you can say in the chat if you cannot hand. Yes.
No, isn't there a raise hand in Google?
Okay, raise hand. Okay, yes, that's great.
Yeah. I thought so because I was like, nah, I don't really need. Okay, great. So what this basically is doing, similar to what you would do using a component. So let's check on page. We use this one here, where I just pass basically the handler click function, which is set up here. And the label, what's displayed on the button itself, and the data test ID. So Jest now wants to actually try to render this button in the test, because Jest does not really care about if it's running on localhost 3000 or not, because Jest does not really want that. So there are a few things in React testing library which just makes it easy just to render your component. So basically what you would do, I just copied this from the other one. That's actually the wrong test, just this one, because I'm at the page level. I want to test this one. So there is nothing really changed, except that I can't copy paste it. So this one will basically simulate Jest to just render your calculator button. But in that case, nothing really happens because you don't really do anything. We also use Jest to mock the function because, as you can see, the handle click function sits on page level and not in the button, so it can be reusable. So now what we actually want to do, we just check button element. We just check on the screen, get by text. What this basically is doing, it assigns a variable to whatever Jest finds on the screen with text slash. You can do different things like get by role, get by get all by alt text, get by label text. So it depends like what actually you're trying to get by test ID, but get by text just for this purpose. And now what we just want to say, expect button element to be in a document. Basically, it just says, hey, if I render this component with exactly those properties, and I check what it renders, is that element there? Because if you imagine, if I check by text at 9, that would be a different button. It would fail. Because everything, that's what Jest is seeing. So Jest renders, RTL renders everything in their own little body. So it sees the button, class button, data test ID. Divide with a slash. There's no 9. So instead of when I change the properties to 9, it would also change how it renders. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So for component itself, it can be like, you can test this. You usually have one test where you just have different properties. Imagine a shopping cart and you pass how many, what items, the price, and the total. And that will be the shopping cart. So you check once, but then you also want to check. And I'm usually not that copying and pasting, but I think it might be a bit faster. And I really hope I don't lose the share thing now and again. So what we now do is, because we know inside the calculator button, we listen to something handle click to some function. We then, let's say, fire. So it does something when you click the button. So we have button element again. Screen, get by text. And then now we have the button. We want to focus only on the button. And then what React testing library, it can actually simulate, it clicks the button. What it actually is trying to do now, it just clicks the button. So imagine you have this one. What happens if I click 8? That's actually what I want to just do now. It fires a method. So in that case, we can, since we did have a mock here, so we expect the handler click to have been called once, which basically just means if that element is on my screen and I click on it, I expect the method to have been called once because I clicked it. That's how Jest can be used to test your functions on certain components. But once again, that's a tiny little button where we just make sure that whatever we do, we don't screw it up. Because if we change the name of this one is in that case mocked, but if we change the behavior on the parent, the component itself should not be affected because you just test this isolated tiny little component basically. So now you have seen like those small little tests. You can actually see, so this app I added this one, so it basically you can run all your tests. Oops. npm run test, and it runs every single test it finds with the spec or test file, and it shows you like how many, what is covered. In that case, it's quite easy, but if we imagine if we don't do that, if I just comment this and I would run it again, it should complain that certain things are not really covered. It should complain. It probably does not complain because I'm showing it. Yeah, I'm not showing it. But you see here the calculator button is now tested. And we can go to the top level, basically. So this one is the calculator page. If you want to check out the is it a bad, good practice to render all the app for testing a single component? I'm not sure what you mean. It's like this thing is not supposed to be on page level, to be fair. So you usually have no unit test for page level. That just simulates like what we can do. That's why in the render function. We can go back to that, but the render function is only rendering the calculator button. So you should render only that specific component, because otherwise you would just test the whole app, but not specifically your single one. If you work as an engineer and you have a ticket, for example, you add a new button to your checkout page, which should redirect you to women coding community or whatever, you would basically check and test that specific behavior of that button. So if we don't go through all of them, and I don't expect us to do, feel free to just check out the GitHub and play around. I'm actually working on like a different branch which shows you the solutions. But that would be like test cases. If you think about Jest, I have the calculator. So this one is now what I'm trying to do. Then I want to make sure that if I do 7, in that case 7 plus 1, I expect this to be 8. If I do 8 divided by 0, it should give me an error, because that's just not something with which eval in that case is returning. If you click C for clear, then it should go back to 0. That's basically what you would think about. Okay, hey, that's what we test. Sorry, I usually don't talk a lot like that. So for this one, I set up everything with test IDs. Why did I do that? Imagine you have, as here, you have a lot of buttons. So you don't want to go get all buttons, get the third one, because you just don't really want to be that specific. So if you use test ID, you can simplify all your tests by using get by test ID. So that's basically an easier way. More or less the same if you're used to like HTML and CSS, you can specify an ID. That does not really work. It would work for Jest. So a best practice is like for specific ones where you would really want to test this to add test studies. You can also use that in Playwright. So you just set it up once and you can test the same thing. So imagine we are now testing the same thing for our whole calculator, which is basically our landing page in that case. We do exactly the same. So instead of here, I can get by test ID now, because I gave it a test ID, just display. And what am I doing with this test ID? I actually want to have, so if the page renders or the component renders, the initial one, the initial thing here, I just reloaded it, is 0. So render the page, check if display has expect display elements that to have text content would be in that case 0. Let's just try if it's happy. Yeah, because again, if you do something wrong with your test, you can, if you hover over it, expected element to have text content, you want to have 8, but just rendered your calculator and it received 0, which is the target element, but you actually just made a mistake in your test. You can do that. The same thing, it's basically performs addition correctly. So we do it again. It's just to see that this one works exactly the same. We render the calculator. Then we use fire events. That's the React testing library that the user interaction to click on a button or to click on something. You click on that one. That's actually not what I want, because you would need to click on an element, get by test ID, and we can see get by test ID. You would need to know your test ID. So 1, I gave it data test ID 1, so that's easy. Because imagine you're under the component, display is 0, but you also have a button which is 0. So screen get by text 0 would not work because it gives you 2 elements. That's why it comes in handy if you have test IDs for things like that. So in your page, it performs addition correctly. So we would need to actually add something. So you just think about scenarios by test ID plus. I mean, I wrote that, but if you've written that, you would see like, you would know like what test IDs, or you can just look at the code. Screen get by test ID 1 plus 2, which is then which we then just check again the display, which is the one in the calculator, this one. So if I click 1 plus 2, the display should now be 3, which only works if you actually also test ID, because you would also need to click equal, because otherwise it's 1 plus 2. And then we expect the display to have text content, which should in that case be 3. My math does not let me. Yeah. So my interaction with this whole calculator component would be like, I clicked 1 plus 2 equal, and I expect it to be 3. In that case, if I do that, I could expect it, since I clicked 1 plus and 2, I expect it to be 1 plus 2. Does that make sense so far? I know it's a really basic example, but I wasn't really able to create a whole thing, a whole like really complex system. Which is the calculator page. So now let's just dive into like Playwright, which is a bit more interactive. And this one is probably a bit more like real life scenario. So it just calls an API and gets something and displays it. What we could basically mock the whole thing also with Jest, but Jest is usually just like a unit, and the page itself should not be considered a unit, because normal pages, not my page, has way more than one component. So if we look at this one, we would need to know like what we actually do. So this one, if it fetches the quote once it's rendered, it tries everything. That's our internal Next.js API, which basically just returns the response. If it's loading, it just displays loading. If there is no quote, we just need to handle like if there's like anything up, anything wrong, which you would do with your actual backend. And in the best case scenario, we just render this, which has the quote content and get new quote. And now we want to do what Playwright is doing. So if you have not seen Playwright ever, that might look really fancy. I just need to wait until it opens. Yeah. So I need a new desktop. Okay. So you can see this one. This is Playwright opening its own browser and modifying what you do. So this basically, it lets you also create your own tests. So if you have no experience at all, it lets you play around and just interact with the website, but also change things. Oops. Yeah. So this is Playwright. You can see here, I try to make this large. Yeah. It might be a bit better, not really the best. So this one,
thank you.
This one just tells you that Playwright's page model just opens localhost 3000, which is basically what I did. And then I can click on things, and you see here, Playwright just now adds everything what you do, how you interact with the website, which in theory, you can, in that case, get by roll button, get new code, click, but it does not wait on anything. So it basically, it's just a static layer on top of your website. That's all good to know. That's how Playwright sees and tests every single test you have. So it opens the browser, it mimics the page, it does what you actually tells it to do, and then you have either pass or fail. Oops. Yeah. So in Playwright, I actually prepared some basic things. I talked about this really ominous page object model. This thing is, as mentioned, the class, which basically the whole thing is the class. Might need to make it bigger. Which is the base of every test. So with the base page, which is this page object model, you just define things which are on every single page, like your header, your footer. That's like on every single page. With this page, you can do every other page. In my case, I had like an app, I had a calculator, and I have a quotes page. So in that case, I would tell a page object model quotes page, and I can define every single thing which is only on the quotes page, because you can reuse everything. It extends the base page. So everything what you already defined on the base page, like footer, header, is already there because it just extends it. And in our case, we are interested in like a quote text, because if everything works fine, the application has fetched everything and it displays a quote text. Playwright has this integrated. You can add test steps. It's just like way easier to debug because you see test step, check heading or check content failed, so you know where you have to look at. I also added. That's why I shared the link. So if you're keen on doing that, I might have. Okay, I'm gonna read the questions later. This one basically, it opens the page, and once the browser tries to hit a certain route, like an API call, for example, it immediately returns the mock. It does not wait for the backend. That would be done for integration tests. You would totally not do it for end-to-end tests because you expect your UAT environment to simulate in a different environment to like the one before production. So you would expect behavior to be similar and you don't have to mock anything. Integration tests usually run on your CI/CD when you do like a PR. And when you then merge your PR, then it runs, after it's deployed to your testing environment, then it runs the end-to-end test. Because an end-to-end test needs to run on an actual environment. Integration tests, you can't just mock everything out, because that's just to make sure if everything works as expected from the backend, is your app able to be rendered smoothly. So in our case, I mock this and just give it one content and one author, and all I want to do is like Playwright, open my application, go to the page, quotes, the quotes part, and check if the content is there, because you know Next.js and the page itself already rendered and fetched everything and waiting for the response, and if everything's fine, then you expect the content to be there. So that's like at a much higher level. It does not check like the paragraph itself is like rendered bold or has the date formatted or anything. It basically on like a much higher level, like the one on top, everything works fine. In theory, if you have an app and you have a lot of forms, like you have, I don't know, a 7-step form or whatever, and you just have like, okay, continue, 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 you can mimic the whole interaction from front to back with Playwright using either mocks or not, depending on like where you actually test in that case. Which here in quotes, I just added like before every test, mock the API call. I can show you like how it would be if I don't do it, because it would just not display anything. So the reason why I'm always mentioning this page object model, it makes your life really easy to just use all properties in that class. So you can see here we have check heading is coming from the base page. So we have check heading, we can check quotes page. we can then also get quotes page, check quote exists. I don't have to give it anything because we also have this. So this quote text is get by test ID. Once again, I added test IDs that I can just reuse it and really target the specific element. And the check quote exists, it just basically tells you if it's visible or not. That's a really basic test. So if we run this now, I just need to increase this thing. Increase npm. The difference between integration and end-to-end, it also starts your local server. And I might just remove this skip. So this one, in theory, it checks, is there a localhost 3000? If there's no localhost 3000, it would start up your app. So now we can see, okay, it failed. This is the test report. So we have here that it's not working, because here we have a get role heading level 1, which is quotes page. Let's check how the actually it's quotes page, so it should be there. Yeah. So in that case, we did the mock, we did the test, but we did not tell Playwright to actually open the page, because that's what you need to do if you get quotes page, open mocked page, and we basically just give it quotes. That's a method which is on the base page. So once again, if you're familiar with classes and inheritance and all those really dry topics in JavaScript, then you're familiar. If I define this here, and I can Coco, my cat wants attention. We can use this function, and I created this that I can just use it and give a path. Wait until network idle just basically means, hey, Playwright, wait until the network calls are made, and not just check anything, because sometimes you want to check if certain network calls are, and you can actually check each of them with Playwright. So now we open the page. Once the page is there, we already have this mocked, and then it should check the heading, and it should hopefully work, because it usually never works when you show something, even if it's 100% correct, as sharing the screen, for example. Okay, so now you can see it passed. So now, if I do the same thing again, I open quotes. That's what Playwright is doing. Let me go to my other desktop, because this always opens a different screen somehow. This is what Playwright was doing. It opens the localhost. In my case, I just added desktop Chrome, but you can simulate mobile Chrome, you can simulate mobile Safari, whatever you want, because they have a huge range of different browsers available. And then it checks if that is there. In our case, it was there because we mocked the call. When we do the mock, is that correct? Yeah, it's correct. In theory, you would write an end-to-end test and integration test a bit different, so you don't test the same thing you already tested on integration test. But an end-to-end test, you have no mock, so it would be something like that. But you would not really know if it's a random quote, like what kind of quote is there. So you could not really specify that you really need to check the text. You would check different behavior, which is much more important in an actual environment. Like check if the GraphQL call was called with that specific payload, just to make sure that if my form does some values, I'm going to send it. You can do the same thing in integration tests, but that's not something you would actually just do, because end-to-end tests are way more complex and takes way more time. So if you start using Playwright, don't write the same test for integration and the same test for end-to-end, because you basically test twice the same thing. Think about, if you have an end-to-end test, is it really necessary that you check if my header has home in it? Is that really important? You can do that on integration test level, but on end-to-end tests, you might just want to have, I don't know, you add items to your shopping cart and all those scenarios, and you make sure that everything works together, the correct invoice is created, like all those things, or button to download documents is used. So when it comes to that testing, you can, in theory, reuse every single thing. That's the beauty of Playwright, because you can use that tool for every single test. Because once you have this created, then you can just reuse that. And that's like, you don't have to write it every single time, once and again and again. Because imagine your UI changes, and somehow you don't have a quote text anymore. You have multiple quote texts, and then if you change it here, it changes it for every single test you have, because you just have to have it once. That's the source of truth. In real life scenarios, it's way more complex than this. So in theory, if we want to have an actual better one, we can. I might. Is it just womencodingcommunity.com? Okay. So, and it's also HTTPS.
Yes, it's HTTPS.
So, as again, you can test how it behaves. So let's just mimic this. So we visited this page. Playwright, like the simulated browser, sometimes does have a problem with resizing, so don't worry about that. That's an existing bug they don't want to fix finally. And if I click here, and then let's say I want to click here and here, Playwright records every single thing you do here. So you would have, and it also prefers get by role, for example, header, paragraph, or whatever, heading or link. So it's also good if you think about accessibility testing. There are a lot of packages around, but if you want to test, like, I don't know what we could test, not really. Yeah, Coco. So this one could be a test where you say, okay, if I jump from page to page and then I open the blog post, I would want to have that date in the URL. So you can also check the given URL, and you want to have the date here. You could use the fancy date format I wrote. And that's like what you would do in an end-to-end test, because it mimics real life scenario. So if we would have like any issues on our backend and like our website is down, it would just fail. And if you think about different scenarios, what you want to test, you have way more like, is the UI where it is like on page level in integration tests, but end-to-end tests really harnesses user interactions, like filling out a form. We probably have a form somewhere, right? We have a form? No.
No, I don't think so. But you can navigate to the mentors, for example, search for staff, and they can search and should filter you.
Yeah. So this one, it went, let me just increase it, that you can see it better. So this one has all the steps I just did. It's basically a really good like first approach on like testing what you want. You might want to just update your page object model that you know, okay, hey, in my mentors page, for example, I have this span or this text, then I have a card and so on. That's like your page object model for that specific page. So you would move certain things around. But in theory, it just gives you a really good first impression on like, hey, how would I write my test? Because if I would copy and paste every single thing here, it just runs every single thing again. And as mentioned in the Playwright config, which comes with that application, we defined, you can see here, you can add multiple browsers. So you can mobile Safari. If your product is used 80% on mobile screens, you want to make sure that it behaves correctly and not only like on desktop. In that application, we have like 2 different projects where you can just add multiple devices. So in our case, it knows if it runs, it's called web server, so it knows if it runs integration on your CI, it needs to run the app before that. That's the difference between an integration and end-to-end, because in the end-to-end test, I would just say, go to my staging environment. After it's been deployed to that, run the test and tell me if everything is okay. And that's where it does not need to start. In that case, it just runs npm run dev. In port 3000, it just listens to it. If we're already working on it, it does not open a new one, but it needs to use it because otherwise it would not access anything. I think I talked a lot and a lot of technical difficulties.
Very nice.
So I think I'm pretty much done what I wanted to cover.
There was one question which I think probably you answered, but maybe if you want to address again, Maxine asked if you want to test animated component, square movement, image opacity, can you do that?
So can we test that a component is animated? There are a lot of it depends on the package. Playwright has a lot of support for those, I don't know, smooth scroll or like fading in, fading out packages. That's doable. Most of the time, all these packages have instructions how you could use it in Playwright. So it's definitely doable that you need to like interact with, like, for example, Playwright has a blank page and then you scroll down and then it checks for that. So you can modify it. You can just scroll anywhere or wait for an animation. But if I'm not familiar with like one specific package, but I think it's called Emotion 3D or whatever. So that's definitely something which has integration with Playwright. And you basically just, you can scroll around. You can even zoom in. Did I miss something? And you would do, if you want to test if the 8 is displayed after you click on the button 8, you can, in theory, you can add for the calculator button. You just leave out the fire event, the next one. So if you fire event, click on the 8, and then you can check display should be 8. That would be like a test by itself. I hope it was useful for some of you. But yeah, you can check out the GitHub if you want. That's like a base. It would have like not yet a solution point, but if you're interested, it has Playwright set up, so you could also maybe take it as a reference how you can set it up. But in theory, yeah.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Regarding the integration test versus the end-to-end test, I do see the point when the end-to-end test, you want to have everything up and running and testing. But for the integration test, I think it's quite nice you have the two opportunities or the chance to mock the API and test all the case you want final mocking. But you said that you would rather in this integration test not use the mocking API, but calling directly the backend API. So do you see that we could actually use both approach, that you could kind of do mocking and also testing the correct API?
Yeah, you usually, like in my team, we have both. So we just have like integration tests on our PR level, which basically like modifies like and tests before you merge it. And then it runs every single thing on the end-to-end test. We have like this happy path and unhappy path, where you basically, if you think about Amazon, the happy path would be select an item, add it to the basket, check out and pay and everything. That would be an end-to-end test, which basically just covers the whole thing without mocks. There's nothing mocked here. But integration test gives you like a really good like first impression, because usually on a Next.js level, you don't really test the page itself, because it's just, it's really huge. So it wouldn't cover like a unit test. So that would be an integration test where you just mock the response that it actually renders something.
Okay, thank you. So everyone, please give your feedback for the talk. Thank you, Steph, for the amazing talk and the very nice hands-on, because it was very, very interesting. And thank you everyone for joining. And if you want to know more, I would just tell you that Steph is the coordinator of our platform front end. She's leading and supporting the team. If you want to know more about Playwright, about React, and what we are doing in our open source, just join us, and you can learn more, improve your skills, and also contribute to our open source project. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.